Like, there's no open source alternative, and that's why we started Qbix, because there was no open source alternative.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world, welcome. My name is Gaston de los Reyes, and I'm the director of the Center for Social Impact and Innovation with Glasgow Caledonian New York College. I'm delighted today to introduce to you Dmitry Schuster and Greg Megarshik, who will speak to us about the economics of free speech. Dmitry Schuster teaches courses in risk management and political economy with GCNYC and is an advisor to Qbix, a social networking community app founded by fellow speaker Greg Megarshik. Previously, Dmitry was a co-head of Global Trading Division and global head of foreign exchange with the Crédit Agricole Corporate and Investment Bank, as well as a board member of the Global FX Division of the Global Financial Markets Association. He received his MBA from NYU Stern School of Business and is presently a candidate for the doctorate in finance at the University of Manchester in the UK. Greg Megarshik is the founder and CEO of Qbix, which provides a decentralized platform for building open source web and social apps to build communities. Gregory is an internet entrepreneur and innovator, passionate about the power of social tools to improve people's lives. With Qbix, Gregory has released apps to 6 million people in over 110 countries, working to decentralize social networking and enable communities to manage relationships with their own members. We're really looking forward to your talk. To our guests in the audience, you're encouraged to submit your questions by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and I'll present questions for discussion after the dialogue that Dmitry and Gregory will be having with each other. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for introducing us. Now, I only want to add a few words about Greg, who is a longtime friend and associate of mine. I'd say a remarkable person. He graduated from high school at, I think, tender age of 14, was one of the youngest graduate students of Courant Institute of Mathematics at NYU, after which, having caught entrepreneurial bug, he was engaged in a number of projects that culminated with Qbix, as Gaston mentioned, application for empowering people, uniting communities, and also the Intercoin community currency, cryptocurrency platform.
I wanted to kind of discuss the economics of free speech because it's become such a big topic in today's world, and not everybody understands that. I think audience and followers is a form of capital. It's convertible to other forms of capital and back and forth. So for example, if Ashton Kutcher, the first person to reach 1 million Twitter followers, it's not an accident that he reached it. It's because he was in the movie industry, right? And some capital was bestowed on him by choosing him to star in movies. So previous gatekeepers in the movie industry were selecting him. And then essentially, he was able to parlay that audience, that fame, into his Twitter followers. Of course, once you have a Twitter audience, you can then use that for all kinds of endorsements and other things that can bring you money and capital, and so on. So you can, it's convertible both ways. But when it comes to the web, it's very interesting because we have to keep in mind the web actually did democratize quite a bit. Before the web, people needed access to institutions. They needed access to radio stations or TV stations, newspapers and magazines and so on, in order to get the word out. So many people will hear what they have to say and publish. The web actually democratized access to this, and anyone with a computer can then run their own web server connected to the internet. And as a result, all these new ideas came out on blogs and other things, which previously were not so published. And geographic boundaries, like we're talking right now, became essentially diminished. Anybody can have their own publishing be consumed by people all around the world. Became a feudal society. With Web 2.0, we expect video conferencing and chats and all kinds of things, but those communications go through central servers that are hosted by Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and they don't give out their backend source code. Like, there's no open source alternative, and that's why we started Qbix, because there was no open source alternative. So if you get deplatformed by some of these companies, you have to go to some other company. So in a way, you're choosing your landlord, and you live in a feudal society where essentially you produce the content, but the content is monetized, and some may trickle down to you. Maybe Google will pay you something for your videos, But many of these creators are seeking now to have their own platform and to publish their own speech or their own content and monetize it on their own terms. So Web 2.0, unlike Web 1.0, has not yet been decentralized, and that's why we still live in kind of a feudal society online, if you will.
Well, I suppose we're going to talk about the alternatives towards the end of our conversation. But my question about what you wrote was about less known members of this sort of feudal system. Because if you talk about root certificate, for example, authorities, domain name systems, how do you see these things ever being avoided in any sort of open web infrastructure? Because these, like domain names, seem to be an inherent part of the structure of whatever web or internet provision you would have.
Well, it turns out that as technology improves, it actually allows for more and more decentralization of power, right? So beginning before personal printers and computers, people had to rent mainframes and they had to get printing presses. So patents are like less patent, ability to print something or whatever. That's where the term comes from. So right now we have what's called federated systems, which is to say you choose your landlord, but there's now going to be a free market of landlords. So we're talking about Web 1.0, not the social networks. We're talking about you can choose to host your blog here or there. So there is a robust competition between hosting platforms, and the video conferencing here is a result of voice over IP, which essentially took the cost of an intercontinental phone call from $3 a minute, to zero, pretty much, almost zero, or close to the cost of just going over the pipes, because continents. And why? Because it smashed the monopolies that we had with the telephone companies by creating packet switching. Packets were able to go instead of tying up a line. And so having that competition brought the price to zero or close to it. So what's happening is that we have well-meaning first generation architecture called the domain name system. It's been around for decades, and it's essentially a federated database, which means there is specific control as to who can write in a specific domain. That domain is human readable. So for example, IBM.com, right? There's trademark laws, there's other things that are international that are involved. The International Consortium for Assigned Names Numbers, ICANN for short, is responsible for domain, giving out domains. The previous system was using VeriSign, or private company. So this was given over to the public and our consortium, so that's good, but it's still hierarchical and there's still access. So there are systems where the names are not human readable, things like Tor with onion links, where essentially you have 0x and then a long number. You can also have, for example, Ethereum addresses, nobody cares what it is or spells out. And then you essentially have systems which are based on something called Kademlia. A professor at NYU, actually, this guy taught at NYU, his name is Pitar Maimunkov, co-authored a paper in 2003. I met with him, he's one of our sort of unofficial advisors or consultants. He invented a technique called Kademlia of routing in a distributed hash table. That's what's used by BitTorrent and others. So you can think of the addresses as being essentially non-human readable. It's just a long string of numbers, 160 characters for the BitTorrent network, and or bits, I should say. And what happens is essentially that these values can be stored in variables in a JavaScript program, or they can be behind a link. The title of the link will come from the document, let's say, or you can edit it, but the address is actually not human readable. So when they're not human readable, you don't need a specific hierarchy of authority to get, there's trillions upon trillions squared of possible numbers, and you can just get whatever you want. That's how that works.